Please welcome Ambassador Mark Green of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and our esteemed panel.
Good afternoon. So left and right, U.S. and around the world, everyone agrees that we're living in a time of change and challenge. So how will we think of these times when we look back on them, say, 10 years from now? I'm convinced that what will stand out as much as anything are the record levels of human displacement in the Americas, but all around the world. And so that brings us to today and to this discussion with this esteemed panel. We have Dr. Alejandro Portes from the University of Miami School of Law, Ambassador Julietta Noyes from the U.S. Department of State, Population, Refugees, and Migration Bureau, and the Honorable Salomón Chertorivski, Chamber of Deputies from Mexico. They'll be joining us in this discussion. So let's get underway, and Ambassador, let me begin with you. Huge numbers, 105 million people displaced around the world. What is the State Department doing in working with partners across the region to try to provide support and integration services for these huge numbers?
Well, thanks, Mark. As you said, we are looking at historic levels of displacement globally. We've never had this many people forcibly displaced. And there's all kinds of root causes for that, whether it's conflict, climate change, corruption, poverty, violence. And so we really need to take a look at the causes of that displacement. You mentioned 105 million forcibly displaced people around the world. About 20% of those are right here in this hemisphere. So what we are looking at is working with our partners in the hemisphere to address those root causes, whether it is through development programs, anti-corruption and democracy programs, and a variety of initiatives. But these will take time. Climate change work. These are things that take time. In the meanwhile, we have to deal with the people who are currently displaced or who are thinking about being on the move. And we are providing humanitarian assistance to support these people in their basic needs to save lives, alleviate suffering. The United States last fiscal year provided $1.2 billion in humanitarian assistance to help with integration.
And that's the largest, we're the largest donors in the world by far.
We are the largest donors in the world. That's absolutely, as you well know from your time at USAID. We're trying to promote safe, orderly, and humane migration, but not irregular migration. And so we've come to realize that as a global issue, and I don't want to say problem, let's say challenge, also opportunity, we need to work together, countries of origin, countries of transit, countries of destination, to find ways to make that migration safe, orderly, humane. So we can do that through a variety of means, creating legal pathways like asylum, refugee status, family reunification, work visas, record numbers of work visas issued last year here in the United States. We can look at stabilizing the host communities and finding ways to integrate refugees and migrants as they arrive in new countries. I just arrived this morning from Colombia, as we were talking about backstage. Colombia is doing extraordinary work in receiving Venezuelan refugees. They've received over 3 million Venezuelan refugees. Ecuador is starting to receive and integrate and provide legal status for Venezuelan refugees. We need to look at humane border management because all countries have the right and the responsibility to manage their borders and enforce their laws. So working together diplomatically, working together as a community, working together in a holistic way, because this is an opportunity and a challenge that affects us all, and it has to be managed by all of us together. One country alone can't solve this.
You mentioned the countries of origin as being so key in all this. Obviously, in some cases, we're not as close to the governments of countries of origin as others. So talk about that a little bit. How do you work countries of origin when these are countries that we may have strained relations with?
Well, just because we may have strained relations with the government doesn't mean we don't recognize the humanitarian needs of the people. And so it is possible to provide humanitarian assistance to people even if we disagree with their government, and it's certainly possible to provide humanitarian assistance in the neighboring countries that can be receiving them, and that's certainly what's been happening with Venezuela. We currently have new parole programs that the Department of Homeland Security announced for individuals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. So ways of finding legal pathways for these people so that they don't need to undertake those dangerous, irregular migration journeys.
Dr. Portes, in your research here at the University of Miami, you've used Miami, the city of Miami, as a case study. What have you learned about how Miami has responded to communities coming in and how integration is handled and how humanitarian support is provided?
Well, Miami is important because Miami is not only immigrant populated, but immigrant governed. This is the only city of its kind, and this transition began with the first waves of Cuban exiles, refugees, coming in the 60s and 70s, with children and grandchildren and now in relatively prominent positions. And I would say that this could be an example. For the rest, I'll give you just a brief anecdote that is worth remembering. In the last year, about 100,000 Cubans crossed the border as asylum seekers and came here. 200,000 in general, but I calculate that about 100,000 came to this metropolitan area. I came in October because I am a sociologist, expecting people in the streets, sleeping in the street, forming lines, etc. Nothing. The whole flow had been entirely, invisibly absorbed, and the reason for that is the fact that the social capital network, that's the family networks and so on that people have, and also the fact that this is a community that, precisely because of its past, is relatively welcoming to this, so that everybody is an immigrant or the son of an immigrant. I think that most of the American cities that are receiving asylum seekers today, even those in precarious posts that are sent to places like New York and Philadelphia, are cities that also have vast experience in the reception of immigrants and so on, and therefore they have tended to be more welcoming. The outcome of the process of resettlement refugees depends on two things. Social networks, that is social capital, the ties, family ties and so on, and the general attitude of governmental authorities, both state, that is national and local, toward these flows. Miami is very, if it can be signaled, it's because of its natural receptivity toward new immigrant flows.
Let me just ask you one follow-up on that. So, as you just pointed out, some of it's government to government, but much of it is not, right? Much of it flows through non-governmental organizations, family to family, but also churches and support groups. Describe that a little bit in the case of Miami, newcomers to Miami and the support they receive from community organizations.
Yes, well, the churches are very important. The main area of concentration in this metropolitan area, as people come, is the city of Hialeah. It's an industrial city which had been traditionally a place of reception of wave after wave of both Cubans and other Latin Americans. And it has developed a vast structure of churches, organizations, and so on that are as well as the municipal authorities. But I think that by and large, the networks that make a difference are the family networks. Yeah. That is, everybody has a cousin, an aunt, someone, and then the general receptivity of the community to open up to newcomers.
Congressman, over to you. As Mexico and Central America continue to experience high levels of irregular immigration, we heard reference to countering some of the drivers. Just how do we do that? And what role does the private sector play in attacking some of the drivers that cause people to flee?
Yes, Ambassador, and thank you very much for the invitation to President Frank. Thank you very much. As Ambassador Noyes was saying, we need to take care of the causes. And we need to do good diagnosis because there are a lot of different migrations living at the same place. Mexico is right now a country of origin, a country of destiny, a country of transit, a country of asylum, a country of refugees, a country of huge internal migration. So each of them, it's very different. And the public policy that you have to design and develop for each of those types of immigration, it's different. And not only that, it is dynamic. I mean, in Mexico, until the peak of Mexicans coming to the US in 2007, after that, we had at least 10 years of very little migration. And those were the years in which we started a huge migration from Central America to Mexico. Now, we're living a huge new wave of Mexicans flowing to the States because of my government economic decisions, because of the pandemic, but we are still having a lot of Central Americans. We are receiving a lot of Haitians, Cubans, and we have all types of refugees. You have to develop well public policy, probably 4 things in particular. The first one, in countries of origin, you need good social protection systems, health, education, jobs, well, the economic part. You need to have investment, you have to have well-paid jobs. You have to have security and peace, and you have to have democracy. Probably those in countries of origin. In countries of destiny, you have to start with some generosity. Most of us came from an immigration history, and our countries of origin, of destination, or our families' countries of destination, at some point, they were generous, they were solidary, and we have to think about how do we do the receptions the best way possible, because what we know until now is that immigrants always enrich communities of destination. What Colombia is doing, or last summer I was in Ukraine and Poland, what the Polish government and the Polish people are doing, it's really incredible. And we also have to talk about transit. With organized crime, with all the security issues that happen around transit migration and their human rights, that is a huge problem. In terms of private sector, we need to focus on economic possibilities. And right now, the region is living a huge opportunity with nearshoring. With the moving of manufacture from China to the region, we have a huge opportunity to create a Marshall Plan in terms of economic development of Central America and South Mexico in order to work on the causes.
So, you know, what I'm hearing here is, yes, there are huge numbers, and we all recognize that. But there are also real opportunities, especially at this moment in history. But one thing that is underlying some of this, and Ambassador, you indirectly referenced it, are the children and young children. I think I saw something like 1 million children were born displaced in the last couple of years. And so isn't part of this providing services so that they don't grow up extraordinarily vulnerable, right, to the worst kinds of exploitation that we can think of? So how do we do that? How is Miami doing that? How do we need to do that at the federal level in terms of providing assistance? And as we just heard, Mexico is seeing it from every direction. How do we make sure that we're providing sufficient services to protect vulnerable children?
Go ahead.
Well, I think that this is a city that witnessed an extraordinary program of successful incorporation of children coming along. It was called Operation Peter Pan. back in the 1960s. Many of those children are now in high positions of government and so on. This was an effort by the Catholic Church at that time in bringing that example that the Peter Pan operation can be held up as a model of ways in which the private sector can help and orient this. These children came unaccompanied, and they were raised in the camp by teachers and so on, hired by the Catholic Church. And there are other churches that can do that, because obviously if you leave them alone and they don't have that kind of adult guidance and protection, they are very vulnerable to be victimized and to become victimizers themselves later on. So I think that is clearly the private sector, that is churches and another private institutions are the ones most effective in carrying out this mission.
And Ambassador, I know this is a big focus for you in your work.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. The protection services and looking out for the protection of the most vulnerable people have to be a fundamental part from the design of any foreign assistance program, whether it's humanitarian assistance, development assistance, and obviously you're talking about children education. Right. There are major international initiatives like Education Cannot Wait, which receives considerable funding from the US government, from the private sector, from governments around the world, because we all recognize that in order to ensure that children cannot be exploited and grow up to be productive, well-adjusted adults, they need to have an education. So that has to be a focus of everything that we do. But I would go back to what we said in the first round of answers, and that is that we really have to look for those durable solutions. We can't just say, oh, well, we'll take care of education and not worry about climate change, or not worry about corruption, not worry about conflict. So we have to work on those causes as well. But we also, and I want to take 1 minute to talk about a new initiative that we have here in the United States. One of the durable solutions that we have is for refugee resettlement. And we've just rolled out a new program called the Welcome Corps, which allows private sponsorship by Americans or permanent residents here in the United States, private sponsorship of refugees, so that private Americans can bring people into their communities and support them and provide that network and those connections. And it's really an exciting program. I am confident that there are a lot of either refugees or children or grandchildren of refugees in this crowd in Miami. So I would invite you to please visit welcomecorps.org to find out more about the program. This is one of the ways that we can help ensure better lives for children in the future.
Advertising, I'm only too happy to help elevate, so all good. Again, yes. Mexico gets it all different ways. With people on the move, how is the government working to address some of these challenges?
Let me. We just have 2 minutes, so
I'll answer it all in 2 minutes.
I'll try to. Yeah. Yes, we need to be generous at the national level. I mean, again, Poland increased 25% of the primary school students with Ukrainian children. When Julio Frank designed the universal health coverage in Mexico and I got to implement it, people that were in transit, children that were in transit, were allowed to receive health services in Mexico. But national solutions are not going to be enough. So I do believe that we need to rethink our global governance. Not only viruses do not respect borders, there are many problems that have to be thought and implemented on a global governance way. And I truly think that after the pandemic, we should have learned that we do fantastic things. In just 1 year from a new virus, we had a vaccine. But then when it was time to start distributing equally or with some generosity the vaccines around the world, we got into huge problems. When we talk about children moving around the world, we have to see them as part of all of us. And we really need to focus on creating global governance in order to take care of all those children as if they were ours.
I think that's a really good theme to end on, this notion of recognizing the humanity of those who are on the move, particularly children. So, quite frankly, I could have gone on for a while. I learned a great deal from all of you. Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you.